to the NFL DFS Fever Week 3 podcast. I'm your host, Tommy, aka Millsy. And we're going to jump right into the Week 3 DFS picks and whatnot. And you can find me on Twitter at Millsy021. You can follow the Nosebleed on Twitter at TNBS021. Last week, again, I don't play too much in terms of, I don't play too much money the first, say, 4 weeks, 3-4 weeks. I kind of like to see how the season shapes out a little bit. I like to let it take form before I invest too much. As we saw with Draftkings, week 1, you had someone like Emmanuel Sanders at $5,000, which was obviously way too cheap, and he ended up going off. Then next week he gets a $1,200 price increase, which I think he should be in around the 6,200 to 6,600 range throughout the season. So we're going to have those price adjustments. We're going to have the drastic increases in the first couple weeks. So once that kind of starts to normalize and balance out, that's usually when I start to play a little more. Now I'm still putting in around between 22 and 28 lineups a week, but usually I'm up around, say, 35 to 50 in that range from weeks 4 to 16. So yeah, without further ado, I want to hop right into it. And first up, got a tough divisional game. The New Orleans Saints at the Atlanta Falcons. The game is in Atlanta. In terms of quarterbacks here, Matt Ryan did have a pretty solid week last week. And I do expect them to try and get Julio Jones a bit more involved this week. So I think we'll see Matt Ryan be closer. I don't think he's going to put up 31 points again, but I think we'll see him closer to to about 20 than we will that 9 he put up in week 1 at Philly. I also don't expect him to rush for 2 touchdowns again. That's not very Matt Ryan-esque. And at 5,700, the Saints defense hasn't played up to expectations yet. So at 5,700, I really don't mind him. I think he's a solid play. On the flip side, Drew Brees at 6,400, I don't mind that price either. I mean, Brees is coming off a little bit of a down week. He didn't turn the ball over. He had 2 touchdowns. He only threw for 243 yards, though, and that was against Cleveland. And that was a home game. And now he's going on the road, divisional opponent. The Falcons are going to be without their best safety in Keanu Neal, who's done for the year, and their best linebacker, Deion Jones, who from sideline to sideline might be the fastest linebacker in the NFL. So those are 2 major losses. Deion Jones was also their leading tackler last year. So he's going to be a huge loss for Atlanta. And Alvin Kamara struggled against the Falcons last year. In his 2 games, Kamara had game 1 was one rush for 2 yards and had 3 catches for 25 yards. Game 2 was 12 rushes for 32 yards and 7 catches for 58 yards. No touchdowns in either one of the games. They did have Mark Ingram at that time, so obviously that played a factor in his workload. But without scoring a touchdown last year and Deion Jones fully healthy, I obviously, it's kind of hard not to like Kamara. I just don't like the price. 9,500 is a lot to pay for anybody. That's going to take a good portion of your cap space. So he is coming off a down week, and we didn't get a price adjustment to that at all. He's staying up at 9,500, and he only put up 18 last week. So, I understand to an extent, but when somebody's going to be priced that high, it should be a little better in terms of the pricing. $9,500 for a running back is a lot of money. I understand we've seen Le'Veon up around 10 and David Johnson up around 10-2, but this early in the season, coming off of one big game, playing a team that he struggled against last year, I'm not saying he's going to struggle this week, but playing against, I don't understand the $9,500 price tag. I will have some Kamara. It's just at 9,500, I'm not going to be trying to jam him in the lineups or force him in. To me, it's not that important of a play. I honestly if I'm going to be paying up like that, I'd rather pay up for Michael Thomas at 8,900. But I'll have some Kamara. I'm just not going to go crazy or jam him in. Tevin Coleman got a pretty hefty price increase of $1,100 this week. Did put up 19.5 fantasy points last week. The Saints rush defense has been solid this year, so their issue has been against the pass. So Tevin Coleman at 6,400. Same thing as Kamara. I mean, in terms of how much I'm going to have of him, I'm not going to jam him in. I'll probably have a little bit of him, but he's not a must start for me this week. Hopping over to wide receiver. Now, Michael Thomas Michael Thomas in his career in 4 games against the Falcons has done pretty well. 31 catches on 44 targets, 410 yards and 3 touchdowns in 4 career games versus them. So he's averaging almost a touchdown a game, averaging over 100 yards a game. So, I mean, I think this game shoots out as well. So Michael Thomas at 8,900 with 2 strong weeks to the season. What was it? 17 targets in week 1 and then 13 targets in week 2. And he caught 12 of 13 targets in week 2. So I really like Michael Thomas at his price range. And for wide receivers, when they go over the 100-yard mark, we get a boost there. I do like a stack with him and Breeze quite a bit this week. It just might be a little bit popular. But, I'm really high on Michael Thomas this week. Julio's one of the best receivers in the game. It's just last year against Lattimore in week 13, I think was the first time they played. He had finished the game with 4 for 79, and Lattimore had a pick. But then in week 16, Julio had 7 for 149 against Lattimore. So it's kind of hard to judge with those two, with just those 2 games. And seeing what Mike Evans did to Marshawn Lattimore in week 1, Julio's not off limits, and Julio's under 8K. I'm going to be loading up on Julio. I'm going to have quite a bit of Julio. Anytime Julio's under 8K, I can't pass on him. Until the Saints' pass defense shows me that they figured things out, why not attack them? Most people probably still aren't going to be too interested in going after them because of Lattimore and because of Marcus Williams at safety and what they did last year. But until they show that again this year, why not attack them? I mean, they gave up 48 points in week 1 to the Tampa Bay Bucks. I understand that's a divisional game, but still, that's a lot of points to give up to a team that's Tampa's caliber. Hopping over to tight end, I'm not interested in Ben Watson. He just hasn't been a big enough part of the offense yet for me. I'm not going to try and take a stab and hope I hit that, the 1 week. Although this is a week I could see him doing some damage with no Deion Jones and no Keanu Neal. But he's very touchdown dependent, a little too touchdown dependent. I'd rather go to Austin Hooper, who caught a touchdown last week and caught all 5 of his targets for 59 yards. So if I'm going to take a tight end from this game, I'd go Hooper and save the 200 and go with somebody that I know is getting playing time, is full-time playing time at tight end. I don't think you can go with either one of these defenses, especially the Saints. Like I said, I expect this game to shoot out, so I'm not interested in either one of those defenses. Hopping over to Green Bay at Washington. There might be some rain in this game, so keep an eye on the weather. Aaron Rodgers is Aaron Rodgers. They're coming off a disappointing game where they tied Minnesota. Questionable, roughing the passer call on Clay Matthews allowed Minnesota to tie the game up. So essentially lost them or took a win away from them with that call. But Aaron Rodgers is 7,100. Washington's defense has been good this year. I'm not going to really count week 1 against Arizona because of how bad they've been. But in week 2, even though they lost, they did play the Colts in Washington, and Andrew Luck only threw for 179 yards. He did have 2 touchdowns, but he also had 2 interceptions. So, and Aaron Rodgers' home road splits, now they're not drastic, But on the road, he has 29 less TDs and 14 more interceptions in 3 less games played. So there is something to that in terms of home and away. So with this matchup, with the weather, Washington having a pretty solid pass defense that we've seen so far this year. Granted, it's been against a mediocre team and another team without weapons in the Colts out at wide receiver. So 7,100 is a little bit pricey for me. I'm probably going to pass on Aaron Rodgers. Alex Smith at 5,800 has decent rushing upside and decent rushing touchdown upside. Hasn't rushed for one yet on the year, but he did rush 8 times in week 1 against Arizona. So, and he threw 46 times last week against Indianapolis. So the volume is there, the workload's there. It's just the touchdowns may not be there for him because he's throwing the Jamison Crowder. He does still have Jordan Reed, who is healthy, and Jordan Reed caught a touchdown in week 1, but he only has 2 touchdowns in 2 games. Alex Smith isn't a downfield thrower, so unless he gets a rushing touchdown, which I could see happening this week, at 5,800, I'd just rather save the 100 and go with Matt Ryan. Hopping over to running back, Chris Thompson has gotten this season off to a great start. Put up 20-plus fantasy points in both games this year, excuse me, while only rushing 9 times. Obviously, heavily involved in the passing game. Caught a touchdown in week 1. Week 2 had 14 targets, 13 catches on those 14 targets. Just missed 100 yards by 8. His price was adjusted. He got another $400 increase, but at 6,300, in a game where Green Bay could put up some points and Washington's forced to pass quite a bit, we'll see a lot of Chris Thompson on the field. So Chris Thompson at 6,300, I don't mind him. I'll have some of them. Not a favorite play of mine on the week. But Adrian Peterson, been a little bit more involved in the pass game. He has 5 catches through 2 games. Does have 100 yards in those 2 games. Most of that was from a 52-yard catch in week 1 against Washington. I wouldn't be surprised to see Washington try to establish the run a bit more in this game against Green Bay. Just try to trim the time of possession for Green Bay, try to keep Aaron Rodgers off the field. So at under 5K, Adrian Peterson, I don't think he'll be owned much. Not a bad stab, not a bad dart in a GPP. Did have that huge week 1. So he showed he still has something left in the tank. So at 4,900, I don't mind him. Like I said, I think Washington tries to keep Rodgers off the field, and the best way to do that is to sustain drives. And to sustain drives, you got to get the run game going. On the flip side, I'm not interested in any running backs for Green Bay. With Aaron Jones back, that backfield is turned into a mess, and I'm not interested in trying to figure it out. Hopping over to wide receiver, top price in this game is Devontae Adams at 7,600. Not interested. Probably going to have Norman on him. I do like Randall Cobb a lot at 5,200. Cobb's a high-volume receiver. Yes, in week 2 against Minnesota, he didn't do nearly as much as week 1. He did still have 6 targets. So he has a high volume in terms of targets and catches. He just doesn't get too much in terms of yards. Even week 1, he had 9 catches for 142 yards, but most of that was on the 75-yard touchdown run. So I like Cobb's volume, and they haven't priced him up to where it's unreasonable. He's still 5,200, or he got a $600 price increase to 5,200. Which he's plenty playable to me at that price. He does have upside. There aren't too many people on this team that Rodgers is comfortable throwing to or has a history throwing to, which brings me to the next guy, Geronimo Allison at 4,500, and I love Geronimo Allison. He's shown to be a heavily involved in this pass offense. He's shown that Aaron Rodgers has trust in him, and his snaps are up there. He's on the field for 80% of snaps. And he has 14 targets through 2 weeks and caught a touchdown in week 1. So, like I said, with having Aaron Rodgers' trust, 2 games over double digits fantasy points. I think he's going to break out at some point and pretty much overtake Cobb in the pecking order in terms of receptions and targets. But I'm not sure that happens this week. But even if that doesn't happen this week at 4,500, he's still a good value play. On the flip side, I really don't like any of these Washington receivers. I like Crowder, but he just hasn't done anything through the first the first 2 weeks. And he had 4 targets in both games, 3 catches in week 1, 2 catches in week 2. What worries me about that is that he didn't last week. Alex Smith threw the ball 46 times, and Jamison Crowder only had 4 targets out of those 46. That worries me a bit. So even at 4,200, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in Dotson or Paul Richardson. I'm not interested in any of the Washington receivers. That's why I like Chris Thompson, and I do like Jordan Reed a bit. I think Reed has a solid game. Jordan Reed's a matchup nightmare for defenses because of how athletic and quick he is. Did have 8 targets last week, but lost a fumble. Week 1 he had a touchdown. So, the targets are there. If he's going to see 7, 8, between 7 to 10 targets a game, I'll take that. Now, yes, he is a bit more pricey at 5,400, but he has quite a bit of touchdown upside, and it looks like Alex Smith is comfortable throwing to him already. Jimmy Graham at 49. No, just still a little too pricey for me. Again, this is why I kind of like to wait and see what happens with who and what roles each player is playing in their offense. Because Jimmy Graham, week 1, had 2 catches on 4 targets, and then week 2 comes out for 6 catches on 8 targets for 95 yards. So it's like we don't know which Jimmy Graham it is. Is it going to be Jimmy Graham that catches 6 for 80 and a touchdown, or is it going to be Jimmy Graham who catches 3 for 15 and that's it? And at 4,900. At tight end, that money could be spent elsewhere. I think Eric Ebron, we'll get to that game, but I think Eric Ebron's only 3,500 or 3,700 still, so I'm not interested in Jimmy Graham. Moving over to defense, I don't mind either one of these defenses. I think keep an eye on the weather in this game, and if the weather is shitty. These defenses are both in play. The Packers are 2,600, and the Redskins are 2,000. I don't think Green Bay comes in and blows them out. I don't think Aaron Rodgers comes in and throws 4 touchdowns, especially if it's going to be raining. So both of these defenses are in play at their price points. If they were more expensive, I probably wouldn't recommend it. But you get the Redskins at 2,000 at home, and yes, they're coming off of a game where they only scored 5 fantasy points against Andrew Luck, and that was at home. But this pass defense has been really good so far this year. Only giving up, I think it was 153 yards to Sam Bradford in week 1, and he was under 100 yards at halftime when it was 21-0. So a lot of that came in garbage time. And then last week, yes, they gave up the 2 touchdowns, but they also held Andrew Luck to 179 yards. So at 2,000, I really don't mind the Washington defense this week. Next up, we got Indy at Philly. Carson Wentz is back this week. $6,200 price tag. Not bad. Obviously has the rushing upside. I'm probably going to take a wait-and-see approach on him and see exactly how he looks after week 1. I don't think they're rushing him back. I don't think it's anything like that. I just want to see him be comfortable and trust his knee and take off and run and show that he's the quarterback he was prior to last year getting hurt in his first game. I think he will get back to that point. I just don't know if it happens in his first game back. Now, yes, they are playing Indy, who's a terrible defense, but I just want to see a little bit from him before I'm investing in him too highly. If you want to take a stab with him or a GPP dart with him, by all means, I don't mind that at all. I doubt he'll be owned. Then you got Andrew Luck at 5,600. This to me is entirely too cheap. I'm not as high on Philly's defense as everybody else is. I don't think they're that good. I thought they lost a lot of crucial pieces, or a lot of pieces that were rotational pieces, so that a lot of the starters could get rest or could get a break, get a breather, or whatnot, and they don't have that luxury this year. And if you have Jalen Mills on T.Y. Hilton, I'll take that matchup for T.Y. Hilton all day. So Andrew Luck at 5,600. Last week, he put up 13. Did throw for 2 touchdowns, also threw for 2 interceptions. He's got a good chance to hit the 300-yard bonus. I think this game could shoot out. So Andrew Luck at $5,600 is one of my favorite quarterback plays of the week, and I'm going to have a decent amount of Andrew Luck this week. Be curious to keep an eye on Ajayi and see what happens with him this week. If he's out, upgrade Wentz a little bit, and we'll be curious to see if Sproles comes back this week as well. He hasn't practiced yet, so most likely not. And if Jay Ajayi is out, that means it's going to be a lot of Corey Clement, and Corey Clement is 4,300. And last week had a rushing touchdown and had 5 catches for 55 yards and 6 targets. So with Wentz back, likely no Alshon. And like I said, I expect this game to be a bit of a shootout. Corey Clement at 4,300 is likely going to be a very, very popular play. Just keep an eye on Jay Ajayi's status and Darren Sproles, even though Sproles is most likely to be out. Marlon Mack, not sure what's going on with him. He missed practice on Thursday, but it could just be the Colts kind of managing his reps because he is coming back from injury. He did touch the ball 11 times last week. Only put up 4 fantasy points, but he was coming back from injury. We don't know if he's 100% or if he re-injured something. So I'll be keeping an eye on him. But if he does play, and there are no limitations, or he didn't re-injure or re-aggravate anything, Marlon Mack at 3,800 could be a really good play because I think they're going to increase his touches. The healthier he gets and whatnot. Jordan Wilkins had a solid week rushing the ball last week. He had a 6.1 yards per carry average on 10 carries. Did have 2 catches as well, turned it into 8 fantasy points, 3,700. If they do turn this backfield into a bit of a timeshare, call it, I don't like any of them. It's just not enough touches to go around. They rushed the ball, 24 times last week, which is on the high end for the Colts. The guy who got the rushing touchdown last week was Nyheim Hines, but only had a 1.8 yard per carry. So if Marlon Mack, if we find out that he's healthy and this was just managing reps, at 3,800, if we also get something, some kind of news on how much he's supposed to play, just keep an eye on that. As of now, there's nothing on that. So if he does play, though, at 3,800, that's solid value, too, and that's on the flip side of Corey Clement. So you got to figure, if Ajayi is out, Corey Clement's going to be the chalk at 4,300. If we get word that Marlon Mack's going to see a bigger workload, that might be a nice pivot to try and get away from the ownership and the chalk, try to be a bit contrarian. T.Y. Hilton at 6,700. Anytime T.Y. Hilton is under 7K, he's in play for me, unless he's going up against like the Jaguars or a shutdown corner. Hilton has missed practice with a quad injury so far, but he's downplayed it, says it's not a big deal and that he'll be out there Sunday, so I believe him. He had 11 targets in the first 2 games, 22 through 2 weeks. Was Andrew Luck's favorite target since Andrew Luck's been in Indianapolis. In 2016, T.Y. Hilton led the league in receiving yards with Andrew Luck. Got off to a decent start. Like I said, the 11 targets in both games, 2 touchdowns through the first 2, 1 in each. Did put up 20-plus fantasy points last week. I have him this week as a good bet to top 100 yards and a score. So T.Y. Hilton at 6,700. I don't think he'll be too highly owned. So I really like T.Y. Hilton this week. And on the flip side, Nelson Aguilar, love Nelson Aguilar this week. Getting Wentz back, no Alshon, high volume in terms of targets, caught a touchdown last week. Has had double-digit targets in his first 2 games, 10 and 12 respectively. And like I said, getting Carson Wentz back is a big deal. I think that's going to open up the offense a bit more for Philly. So Nelson Aguilar at 6,100. I really like that price on him. The fact that he's almost 6K or under as the number one receiving threat on Philly, outside of tight end, outside of Zach Ertz. 6,100, love it. Alshon's likely out this week. No word on it yet. Mike Wallace is also out. He's done for the year. So that obviously is going to kind of make Jeffrey's return more important, but I don't expect that to happen this week. I think he'll be back next week. They don't want to rush him back and then have him get hurt and then be down 2 wide receivers as opposed to 1 week without 2. Hopping over to tight end, Zach Ertz is 6,800. He's a fine play. I don't like paying up for tight end. I'll probably have a little bit of Zach Ertz this week, but I'm not all in on him by any means. Jack Doyle at 3,500. Nice price tag on him. He did return to practice today, so he was not at practice today. He wasn't at practice today. So tomorrow, Friday will be a big day to see if he returns to practice. If he returns to practice on Friday, he's good to go. If he doesn't return to practice tomorrow, be a bit concerning. But then Eric Ebron becomes a must start in every format at 3,400. But if he is out and you want to be a bit contrarian, Jack Doyle's going to catch a touchdown one of these weeks. They're not playing Ebron enough. He's only at 30 to 40. I think it's 30. Yeah, about 30 to 40% of the snaps for Indy. They're not running as much of a 2 tight end set as I had thought they would. To me, all the tight ends in this game are in play, from counting Ebron, Doyle, and Ertz. Ebron is probably my favorite tight end play of the week, but I do like Jack Doyle a bit too, and now that his price has come down to 35, I think that both these tight ends are playable. Moving over to defense, I'm going to pass on both these defenses. I understand playing the Eagles. If I were to pick a defense from this game, I would actually go with Indy. Just because Carson Wentz is making his return, we don't really know what to expect from him. So, I don't expect anybody to own Indy's defense either. And Indy's defense hasn't been bad this year by any means. At 2,100, it can't get much cheaper. They did put up 9 last week, 5 the week before. They are playing the Super Bowl champions. I get it. I'm not saying it's a good play, but it's not an awful play either. For example, I think Indy's defense outscores New Orleans defense, who's 2,600. Next up, we got Buffalo at Minnesota. This game's going to be quick. Kirk Cousins at 6,800, not in play for me. I know he had a huge week last week. I had a decent amount of Kirk Cousins last week. I figured that game to be a shootout. I just can't, with the game being in Minnesota, Buffalo struggling, not being able to put up points. Josh Allen, rookie on the road, having to play this defense. LaShawn McCoy fractured his ribs. Not much receiving threats. I'm no interest in either of these quarterbacks this week. Running backs, Dalvin Cook's hamstrings bothering him, I guess. He said after the game that he was fine, that it was just cramps. But he has missed 2 practices now. So Friday will be a big day for him as well, so keep an eye on him. 7,100. I have a hard time agreeing with that. I don't know how you give somebody a $600 price increase, especially after week 1 when they played against San Francisco and put up 14.5 fantasy points, and then followed that up when their team scored 29 points with 12 fantasy points. Hasn't topped 50 rushing yards yet this year. Hasn't topped 60 receiving yards yet this year. Doesn't have a touchdown yet this year. I don't understand how he gets a $600 price increase just because he's playing the Buffalo Bills. If Minnesota blows Buffalo out, he's not going to get many touches. If Buffalo keeps it close, it's not going to be in a shootout, so that means Dalvin Cook likely isn't doing much unless he has two short rushing touchdowns, which in the red zone and goal line work usually goes to Latavius Murray. So 7,100 for Dalvin Cook, he's completely off limits for me, whether he plays or doesn't, whether he's healthy or not. 5,800 for Latavius Murray, that's just disgusting. 5,100 for McCoy with the injury. He could be the only way I'd play him was if he was like 3,500. If he does play, he's obviously not going to be 100%. So don't expect the LaShawn McCoy we've seen the past couple of years. His touches have been down this year, especially in the past game. Last week he had 4 catches. Week before he had 1. He had 7 carries week 1, 9 carries week 2. Yet to have a touchdown. Yet to top 40 rushing yards. Yet to top 30 receiving yards. 5,100 is a nice price tag seen next to LaShawn McCoy, but still too much considering the matchup and the issues in Buffalo right now with their offense. Thielen at 7,800, no. Stephon Diggs at 7,800, no. I don't care if Kelvin Benjamin was 3,500 or 3,000. I'm not playing Kelvin Benjamin, not playing Zay Jones. No receivers in this game for me. Tight end, same thing. Kyle Rudolph last week got the volume. He's pretty touchdown dependent tight end. 4,100 isn't a bad price tag for him, but with the matchup, Buffalo not being a very good team in general, don't see them scoring many points. Just don't see the need for Rudolph or Thielen or Diggs. Not going to pay 7,100 for Dalvin Cook. Not going to pay 5,800 for Latavius Murray. Charles Clay's off limits for me. Not interested in the Bills defense, and as bad as the Bills are, I can't pay over 4,000 for a defense. I cannot bring myself to do it. The Vikings would literally have to score 20-something points to make it worth it. And I expect them to be pretty highly owned considering the matchup, so I'm not interested in them at all. Moving over to Oakland at Miami. Be careful of the West Coast traveling east. That is a thing. We didn't see it last week with the Chargers coming to Buffalo, but that was the Chargers at Buffalo. Miami's a much better team than Buffalo is. So this could be one of those games where you see teams travel cross country and end up losing. I personally like Oakland in this game. I don't think it affects them that much. I don't think Miami's very good. I don't think they're coached very well. Kenyon Drake doesn't get enough touches. Frank Gore gets too many touches. But starting at quarterback, Ryan Tannehill at 5,300 against this Oakland pass defense, though, is intriguing. That's a very nice price. He didn't have a great week last week against the Jets, but he still put up 18 fantasy points. Week 1, he couldn't get in a rhythm against Tennessee because the game lasted 7 hours, was delayed twice. So this week he has a home game. I don't think there's supposed to be thunderstorms tomorrow in Miami, so we shouldn't have to worry about the delays and whatnot. So at 5,300, Tannehill's in play. And then Derek Carr at 5,400 against this Miami defense that Sam Darnold just threw 334 yards against. Derek Carr is definitely in play at 5,400. And I expect both these quarterbacks to be almost non-existent in terms of ownership. So both of them make great GPP plays. And if you're looking to pair them with somebody, we'll get to a wide receiver in a sec, but quickly to touch on running back, Kenyon Drake at 5,600. Even though I said Frank Gore gets too many touches and Kenyon Drake not enough, he did have a touchdown last week against the Jets. He is the pass-catching back. He put up 17 fantasy points last week at 5,600. He does have an upside of, say, 25 to 30 fantasy points. He's more than capable of doing that. This Oakland defense doesn't generate much of a pass rush. Not very good against the run. So Kenyon Drake at 5,600, I expect him to be pretty popular this week, but at 5,600, I love Kenyon Drake. Marshawn Lynch, 4,900, not bad. He is limited at practice, but I expect him to play this week. I don't think it's serious. 4 catches on 4 targets through the first 2 weeks. Only has 11 yards, but with a point per reception, you know he's getting the goal line work. You know John Gruden's going to give him the ball 15 to 20 times a game. So at 4,900, guaranteed to touch the ball between, say, 17 to 22 times a game, you're not going to find that many touches in the 4,900 range, and against this caliber of defense. So Marshawn Lynch is in play. Outside of that, no running backs are in play for me. Amari Cooper at 6,600, he's in play. Coming off a pretty decent week against Denver, which we know has a great secondary. Caught all 10 of his targets last week, which was something rare for Amari. 2 years ago, or last year, he had drop issues. Topped 100 yards, put up 24.6 fantasy points without a touchdown. So this week, if let's say he catches 6 of 8 for 85 and a touchdown, 6, 8, 14 and a half to touchdown. It's 20 and a half fantasy points. It's not ideal. I mean, that's not what we want for 6,600, but that's kind of on the low side, in my opinion. I think he could top 10 catches again this week. Jordy Nelson's not a big enough part of the offense yet. They're not running the ball 30 times a game. And the only other real passing option is tight end Jared Cook. So I like Amari Cooper this week at 6,600. Kenny Stills at 5,800, not a chance. No. Devontae Parker plays or not, I don't care. I'm not playing Kenny Stills, and I'm not paying 5,800 for Kenny Stills. While Devontae Parker, he's someone to keep an eye on. If he does play, he's 4,100, and he has the makeup of a number one receiver. He has that talent and potential. Freak athlete, big receiver, downfield threat. So at 4,100, if he plays, I really like Parker, and I think he's going to go a bit under the radar in terms of ownership. Outside of that, if you want to take a stab, if you want to go real off the board and take a stab with Martavis Bryant, that I actually like this week a bit. He was with the team in camp. He got cut. He's facing a season-long suspension. He's allowed to play during the appeal. He had 4 catches on 4 targets last week for 30 yards. If you throw a touchdown in there, he puts up 13 fantasy points, and he's 3,400. On a week where there is value, but a lot of the value is going to be chalk. He's a decent pivot from them while also gaining salary. And what I mean by that is most of the value this week is in the 4,000 range. We'll say 4 to 4,800 range. So at 3,400, you can free up, we'll say $1,000 to $1,600 with Martavis Bryant, who has upside. I expect, if he does beat his appeal, I expect Martavis Bryant to overtake Jordy Nelson, in all honesty. Jordy Nelson just hasn't looked good with Oakland. He hasn't looked right in terms of himself. I don't think he's quote-unquote over the hump or too old. I think he's close. I just don't think I think Green Bay was a match made in heaven for him. I don't think he'll be able to match that production elsewhere. But he is questionable, so he is someone to keep an eye on. Moving over to tight end, Jared Cook at 4,000, completely in play. Just be careful because he'll likely have Rashad Jones on him a lot in coverage, and Rashad Jones is a really good safety. But at 4K with his upside and the amount of targets he's seen in the first 2 weeks, granted week 2 was only 4, but that's 16 targets. That's 8 targets a game on average. Yes, it's only 2 games, small sample size, but I remember the Monday Night Football games, John Gruden would talk about Jared Cook when they would play. And, if I had this guy, I'd do this. Oh, he's a special player. You do this with him. And we're seeing him use him that way. Defenses, Dolphins defense at 2,700, playing at home, put up 13 both weeks, has a defensive touchdown on the year already. Put up some decent numbers last week against the Jets, had 2 picks, a fumble recovery, and 3 sacks, only gave up 12 points, averaging, 14 points a game. So at 2,700, I don't mind them. They're worth a stab. Raiders at 24, I don't like them. I'm not interested in the Raiders defense. I don't think the Raiders defense is very good at all. We'll take the trip from Miami to Baltimore, where we got Denver at Baltimore, another game to monitor in terms of the weather. Looks like it might rain here as well. Joe Flacco coming off of a big week against the Bengals. I believe 2 of those touchdowns, I can't remember exactly. We were doing the show last week during the games, which won't be happening anymore. That's going to be changed. So these will be out. The DFS podcast will be out by Friday morning, and then the Friday night Pick'em podcast will still be released around Friday morning as well, or Saturday morning, excuse me. But there'll be the Friday Pick'em podcast time isn't changing of release. It'll be recorded and released at the same time. But Flacco threw the ball 55 times last week. That's something we're most likely not going to see again. Week 1 was an absolute blowout of Buffalo. He faces his toughest test yet against Denver, while he's at home and is averaging over 20 fantasy points a game. I'm not interested. I'm not really interested in Flacco. I'm not interested in Keenum at all. Flacco, though, one thing I did want to note of Joe Flacco is his home road splits. On the road, Flacco has 92 touchdowns to 80 interceptions. At home, he has 113 touchdowns to 52 interceptions. So his play is a lot different from the home and the road. It's kind of like Big Ben. You don't want to play Big Ben on the road, Big Ben at home, fire him up. Not the case with Flacco, especially against this Denver defense. I like them to rebound this week. I think this is a pretty low-scoring game, especially with the potential weather issues. Running back, the only running back that I really like in this game, because for Baltimore, we'll start there. I know Alex Collins, week 1, he only had 7 touches. Yes, he had a touchdown, but he only had 7 carries, and he lost a fumble. Week 2, he only had 9 carries and 3 catches on 4 targets. Now, no touchdowns in that game. Now, for 5,200, his price isn't crazy, but his highest scoring game is 12 fantasy points this year. Javorius Allen has outscored him both weeks. So Javorius Allen is also $600 cheaper. While he's not getting as many touches in terms of rushing, he does have 2 rushing touchdowns, and he has 10 catches through 2 games. So he's averaging 5 catches a game. The yardage isn't really there. It's 51 yards. But where it's a point per reception, and Baltimore is likely going to have to rely on their short passing game and passing to the backs and tight ends because of Denver's corners. Javorius Allen at 4,600 is a solid play. My favorite play from this game is Phillip Lindsay. I absolutely love Phillip Lindsay. I think we actually see him get more touches this game. I think we see him closer to the 18 carry range and up around 20 to 22 catches, especially if the weather does play a factor and it is wet. Phillip Lindsay in the passing game is a bit of a problem. In week 1, he did catch a touchdown. So the only problem with Lindsay is Royce Freeman is the goal line back, but Phillip Lindsay is going to catch more passes, and Phillip Lindsay is going to get a lot more work in between the 20s. So I like Phillip Lindsay at 4,600. I think people shy away from him this week because of it's Denver at Baltimore. So he's completely in play for me. I don't expect his ownership to be high at all. Moving over to wide receiver, Emmanuel Sanders, $200 price increase after a 13-point game. Case Keenum got a drop in price. This game has a low total, potential weather issues. Baltimore's defense is solid, especially at home. Not interested in Emmanuel Sanders at 6,400. The price isn't bad, but I just don't think he brings back value for that price tag. Now, on the flip side, Demaryius Thomas hasn't been overly productive so far this year. Last week, really didn't do shit. Had 5 catches for 11 yards. The 5 catches were nice because we got 5 points, but 11 yards isn't shit. He put up 6 fantasy points, or 6.75, or 6.8, excuse me. 18 in week 1. He did have 10 targets in week 1, 11 targets in week 2, so 21 targets through 2 games. 10 and a half targets per game through the first 2 weeks. At 5,200, I think a lot of people are completely off of him after last week. I love this week to hop on. He got a $400 price drop, while Sanders got a price increase. I think if anybody is playing a Denver wide receiver from this game, it's going to be Sanders, so I like the pivot to Demaryius Thomas, especially to get away from some of that ownership. Crabtree at 5K. I don't like this matchup for Crabtree. He's a possession receiver / chain mover, and if he's got Chris Harris on him, it's a wrap. So I don't like Michael Crabtree in this matchup. The only wide receiver that I like for Baltimore is John Brown. John Brown's the real deal. Did have 10 targets last week, caught a touchdown the first 2 weeks. I love John Brown for the course of the season, just not this week. He's the only one I really understand playing. Willie Snead, another player I like his prospects long term for the year, has put up double digits in both has put up double-digit fantasy points in both games. But at 4K, as the number 3 option against a team that's strong against wide receivers, I'm just not going there. Hayden Hurst is out for Baltimore. Not going to mess around with any of these tight ends. There's too many of them that share snaps. There's no clear-cut number 1 for either one of these teams. So I'm just not going to mess around with it. Defensively, the Broncos are only 2,400. Hop on it, hop on it, hop on it. And I'll say the same thing about the Ravens at 2,800. I expect this game to be low scoring. I don't like either one of these quarterbacks in this matchup. We could have some shitty weather that'll play a factor. So both of these defenses are strongly in play for me, especially Denver at 2,400. I'm not sure if those defenses are going to be too popular either. So there's some upside there too, because ownership might be low, and upside in terms of points. Both of those teams are capable of scoring a defensive or special teams touchdown. And the Broncos defense is, their pass rush is unbelievable. So I could realistically see 7-8 sacks for this defense, giving up 10 to 13 points, potentially a defensive touchdown, and say 2 turnovers. That's going to get you 20 points for 2,400. That's hard to beat, but that's what we're looking for, especially in GPPs. So we're going to leave Baltimore, thank God, and head to Carolina. What do I say about Carolina? Cam Newton is only 6K, coming off of a huge week against Atlanta, in Atlanta, where he put up 32 fantasy points, 31.6, but had a rushing touchdown in week 1, threw for 3 touchdowns last week, put up 18 fantasy points in week 1, and didn't throw a passing touchdown, and threw for 160 yards. So there's a lot of ways that Cam can put up points, and at 6K, that's way too cheap for me. Andy Dalton, huge week last week, solid week 1 against Indy, has 6 touchdowns on the year in the 2 games, but and his home road splits are almost identical. It was actually pretty wild. He had I think it was an 89.8 passer rating at home, and then 88.9 passer rating on the road. It was like 88 touchdowns at home to 86 touchdowns on the road. So home road splits with him really don't matter. No Joe Mixon could lead to a bit more passing for Cincinnati, but the chalk, I'm not playing Dalton. I will play Cam Newton, though, at 6K. That's way too cheap for Cam. With Mixon being out, Gio's going to be the next man up for Cincy. Likely see a feature back workload, and is priced up to reflect that at 5,900. Since this was the Thursday night game last week, Draftkings had the time to analyze Joe Mixon's injury and have Cincinnati's salaries reflect that. But I'll have some of them, but I'm not going to go crazy at 5,900. There's some value that I think will be close to his scoring, if not right on par with him, and for $1,000 to $1,300 cheaper. So I will still have some Gio, though. He's going to be heavily involved in the pass game and heavily involved in the rush game. As far as Carolina, Christian McCaffrey coming off a 14 target a 15 target, 14 catch game. That's what it was, where he had 100 yards, got the bonus for the 100 yards, put up 31 fantasy points without a touchdown, had 14 and a half fantasy points week 1 with a fumble lost. So I love Christian McCaffrey. They said they want to get him the ball between 20 to 25 times a game. And he only had 10 rushes in week 1 and 10 rushes in week 1, 8 rushes last week. So 18 rushes through 2 games. So most of those touches are coming through passes where we're getting a point per reception. He is priced up a bit at 7,800, but if he can have a week, say he has 8 catches for 85 yards and a touchdown, that's 16 and 6. We're looking at 22 fantasy points right there. If he rushes for another 40 yards, we're at 26 fantasy points. Throwing another touchdown, we're at 32, and he's well exceeded value. I think that $800 price increase might scare some people off. So I like Christian McCaffrey this week. Flipping over to wide receiver, AJ Green coming off the monster 3-touchdown game, 7,500. It's a fair price for him. Don't love him, don't hate him. We'll have some of them, but I'm not going to go crazy, and I'm not going to try to jam him in the lineups and whatnot. Devin Funchess I really like in this matchup. Cincy's corners are a little bit better than they get credit for. They have a nice trio with Kirkpatrick. Why can't I think of them? I'm not going to be able to think of all of them, but they do have a nice trio of corners. But Funchess is a big target. He's a red zone target. He's at 5K. He's at home. There's no Greg Olsen. So the only person he's really competing with targets with is Christian McCaffrey. Those are the only 2 that Cam Newton's comfortable with. Even if Curtis Samuel returns this week, I'm not interested. He's still not back to practice, so if he's out, I like Funchess even more. Tyler Boyd at 3,700 is intriguing to me, not just because of last week, but I've had him in my season-long league. I've had him on my watch list since the beginning of the year. He's a freak athlete with great hands, and what I mean by freak athlete, he's not going to wow you with speed, but this dude makes the most incredible catches you'll ever see. Just look up Tyler Boyd Pittsburgh stats or Pittsburgh highlights, and you'll see some of the catches he makes. Did have a touchdown last week. He's not going to go score 70, 80-yard touchdown. That's not his style. More of a possession type, big-bodied, chain mover. But 9 targets last week, had a touchdown and 90 yards, is only 3,700. This game has some scoring upside. So Tyler Boyd at 3,700, he's in play, and I'll definitely have some of him. Tight ends in this game, I'm not interested in either of these tight ends. That's it. Defenses, the Bengals, I don't mind them. Double digits in the first 2 games, 2,500. They're in play. There's a lot of defenses this week that are in play. I don't usually pay up for defense. I like to be in the 2 to 2,900 range. And this week, it's take your pick. There's so many of them, including the Panthers. I'm likely to avoid both of these defenses. I mean, I'll have a little bit of them mixed in, but I'm not going to go heavy with either one of these defenses. That game could not shoot out, but it could be relatively high scoring in the sense that we see the offenses doing the damage and not much from the defenses. So we'll leave Carolina and we'll head to Houston, where we have the Giants at the Texans. Giants coming off of a rough Sunday night loss at the Cowboys. Deshaun Watson, Houston coming off of a bad loss at Tennessee, where they lost to Blaine fucking Gabbert. But this week, Deshaun Watson, 6,100, fire him up, rushing upside, throwing to a healthy Will Fuller, DeAndre Hopkins, fire him up. Eli Manning at 52. I'm not interested in Eli Manning. I'm not going to play Eli Manning again until I start to see some consistency from him, or he shows that he's still got a little something more left. Right now, he's not really fantasy relevant. Running back, Saquon at 76. bit high priced. I'm really torn on Saquon. I know he had the huge week last week in terms of receptions and had the 100 yards rushing in week 1 with the touchdown. He is heavily involved in the pass game. I expect him to see around 20 touches a game. Just that 7,600 is just a tiny bit too much for me. I don't expect him to have 14 catches on 16 targets again this week. I think that number goes down to about 6 or 7. I could see a touchdown for him, but at 7,600, he's just priced too high for me. Lamar Miller at 5K. This Giants rush defense is pretty good. Their line up front is pretty beefy, with Damon Snacks Harrison in the middle. Lamar Miller's yet to rush for a touchdown. In fact, Alfred Blue vultured one from him in week 1. So even though he's 5K, there's value elsewhere that's cheaper than him. So I'm not going to have any Lamar Miller this week either. Wide receiver, Hopkins and Beckham, $83 and $8,200 respectively. Both are in play for me. Hopkins was questionable coming in the last week and played. This week he's got a thumb, ankle, and hamstring injuries. But he was injured last week, played through it. He caught 6 passes for 110 yards and a touchdown, put up 25 fantasy points. I don't expect his ownership to be too high. I think people are taking a wait-and-see approach with him, and it's just a matter of time before he breaks out and has a huge game. And why not this weekend, where we could potentially see a wide receiver showdown between Odell and DeAndre Hopkins. Games like this kind of elevate those kind of players' play because they want to outperform the other wide receiver. So both of these guys are in play for me. I'm going to have a lot of them. Odell at 82. We just don't see Odell that cheap. I played him week 1 when he was only 7K against Jacksonville. That's way too cheap. So at 8,200, it's a decent price for him. I mean, I expect him to be throughout the season between 8 and 8,800, but more towards the 8,800 most weeks. So 8,200 will definitely have a decent amount of Odell. I think it's back to the drawing board this week for the Giants on offense, and they find ways to get Odell the ball this week. So I think he's going to be heavily included in the game plan. And like I mentioned before, the rivalry, so to speak, between the two wide receivers on opposite sides of the field is going to bring out the best in both of them. So both of them are in play for me. Will Fuller, I'm not going to go too crazy with. I know he had a nice week 1, where he had 9 targets, 8 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown. But I'm not sure if Houston's going to have to, if they're going to go crazy throwing the ball, if they're going to try to do a bit more of, try to control the ball a little bit more this week and sustain some drives. But Will Fuller at 59, he's just a little too pricey for me because I like Hopkins so much in this game. I like Hopkins for 2 touchdowns in this game. So Will Fuller at 59, and after his huge week last week, I think we see a lot of people go his way and go his route. But he can get hurt at any time. Last week was one of the first weeks where we've seen him high volume in terms of catches and targets. Yeah, we've seen him put up huge numbers in the past, but usually it's on 8 or 9 targets, but he'll catch 4 or 5 balls because so many of them are deep balls. So moving over to Sterling Shepard at 4,500. I'm not going to play Sterling Shepard. I don't have anything against him, but I just want to see him used a bit more in the offense before I go and start playing him in fantasy. He's just not an option for me yet, especially at the 4,500. Although he does have upside. Evan Ingram at 4,300, one of my favorite tight ends on the week because I think people are going to be scared of Houston. But we saw Rob Gronkowski go off against them in week 1. I'm not comparing Evan Ingram to Rob Gronkowski. I'm not saying he's that good, but Evan Ingram is very good. And he's a freak athlete, and he's only 4,300. So Evan Ingram's in play for me, but in terms of Houston tight ends, not interested. Nobody there is really in play for me. These defenses, the Giants have let me down so far this year. I don't like the matchup with Deshaun Watson. I don't think they do much. I also don't like the Texans defense either, though. Neither one has really shown me much to start the year. So with so many other good defenses that are cheap this week. I'm going to avoid those two. We'll leave Houston and head to Jacksonville, where we have the Titans at the Jags. Quarterbacks, Blake Bortles coming off of a huge week against New England, where he threw for over 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. But now, I'm not playing either one of these quarterbacks. I don't care if Mariota plays, but last year, Tennessee beat Jacksonville both times that they played, including 37-16 in Jacksonville. And Bortles last year he threw 1 touchdown to 4 interceptions, and one game had 2 interceptions with no touchdowns. So I obviously, considering he had 1. So I can't trust Blake Bortles. I've said it all year. I know he had the huge week last week, but I can't trust him, even if this is a plus matchup. And even if Fournette returns, I'm not interested in either of these quarterbacks. If Fournette does return, game 1 last year against Tennessee in Jacksonville, he had 19 carries for 69 yards and 4 catches for 67 yards. Not bad, but not numbers worth paying $6,900 for. And then week 2 was 14 carries for 40 yards and a touchdown and 2 catches for 21 yards. Again, not worth paying $7,000 for. So Fournette, whether he plays or not, I'm not interested in him. He's coming off of a hamstring injury that I think is a little more severe than we were led on to believe. So I'm not interested in him. If he does sit, TJ Yeldon at 5,100, worth a shot. Kind of let me down last week, but did get a decent amount of touches and is involved in the passing game, is a pretty good passing back. Now, in this backfield, I do like Dion Lewis a bit. Jacksonville's susceptible to running backs out of the backfield. Week 1 with Saquon, we didn't see it too much. I think he had 2 catches in week 1. But he did rip off that long touchdown run. But last week against New England, James White had 7 catches for 73 yards, and Sony Michel had 1 catch for 7 yards. So combined out of the backfield, there was 8 catches for 80 yards. So Jacksonville can be beat by running backs out of the backfield. And Derrick Henry last year in Jacksonville had 14 carries for 92 yards. And the game in Tennessee had 28 carries for 51 yards, but 1 catch for 66 yards and a touchdown. So Derrick Henry, at his price tag, has had success against Jacksonville last year. I like both of these running backs this week. I think Dion Lewis is in play at 4,500 and Derrick Henry at 44. I don't think Derrick Henry's really going to be touched at all, but does have some history against Jacksonville that's on the positive side. And at 4,400, we don't need him to put up a 35 or a 25. If he puts up 18, we're happy with that at 4,400. Obviously, we'd like more, but the value this week, it's not like it was in week 1. The value's a little bit more, a little more hard to find this week. But a starting running back for 4,400 that's going to get potentially 14, 15, 18 carries, it's hard to find someone at that price that's going to get that many touches. Wide receiver, if I'm playing a wide receiver for Jacksonville, it's T.D. Westbrook. I know Keelan Cole had that amazing catch last week, had over 100 yards and a touchdown. And Keelan Cole's probably number 1 on the pecking order. Still a decent price. I will have some Keelan Cole, but again, it's not going to be a force him in. Week 1, he did only put up 8. His prices jumped all the way up from 3,800 week 1 to 5,600 now, so there's less room for error with him. If I am playing a wide receiver here, it's going to be D.D. Westbrook. D.D.'s top 10 plus fantasy points in both games. Caught a touchdown in week 2 against New England, which was a 61-yard touchdown, mostly a catch and run, where he just blew by the defense. D.D.'s a freak athlete, good speed. He was great at Oklahoma. So I like D.D. quite a bit. Now, Corey Davis at 4,400 is intriguing to me this week. He did put up double-digit fantasy points last week. He's averaging 10 targets a game through the first 2 weeks. Hasn't topped 100 yards, but he's heavily involved in the offense. And with no Delaney Walker, they're finding ways and they're trying to get Corey Davis the ball more and more. Especially if Mariota returns, I do like Corey Davis as an off play. I don't expect too much ownership on him. And at 4,400, I mean, that's a great price tag for a number one who's getting number one volume. Flipping over to tight end, Safarian Jenkins is questionable. I'm not interested in playing him. He's got three catches for 20-something yards in his first two games in each one. So he had 3 catches for, say, 21 yards in week 1 and 3 catches for 25 yards in week 2. Did catch a touchdown against New England. But at 3,300, I need a little more upside. Jonnu Smith, I'm sure he burned a ton of people last week. I'm not interested in him. Jaguars defense at 4K. While this is a dream matchup, we've seen these matchups in the past and they don't really pan out the way we hope or expect. So I don't pay up much for defense. I'm not paying up this week. I like the Titans at 2,300. I like their defense. Until Blake Bortles has shown that he's really taken a step forward and he can string a couple games together, really good games together, I still am going to play defenses against him. And like I said, Tennessee beat Jacksonville both times last year. They beat them 15-10 in Tennessee and beat them 37-16 in Jacksonville. So they gave up, 10 and 16? They gave up on average 13 points to them last year. So I really like the Tennessee defense for 2,300. All right, we'll leave Jacksonville and head to the hottest city in the world right now, Kansas City. Pat Mahomes, and Pat Mahomes is only 7K. Give me all the Pat Mahomes. Give me all of them. Think about this. He has 10 touchdowns through 2 games, both of those games on the road. He hasn't gotten home yet. Put up 28 in week 1, 41 in week 2. 10 touchdowns in 2 games to no interceptions and no turnovers. I mean, what he's doing right now is incredible. I understand the offensive weapons that he has around him and the focus that takes of defenses to defend those weapons. That's going to obviously benefit Mahomes greatly. But the dude still set NFL records for the most touchdown passes through the first 2 games of the season. So 10 touchdowns to 2 games, averaging 35 fantasy points, only 7K, finally getting a game at home against San Francisco. I'm going to load up on a ton of Pat Mahomes. I'm just a little worried because I think everybody else is too. Jimmy Garoppolo at 65, coming off a 16-point game. I don't like the $500 increase. I hate when Draftkings does this. I hate when they price players up strictly because of matchups when the players haven't done anything. So Jimmy Garoppolo is a perfect example. 5,700 week 1. Against Minnesota, and he put up 12. Okay, you expect that against Minnesota. So if you want to increase him, say $100 to $300 in that range, okay, he gets a home matchup against Detroit. I understand a $200-300 increase, which he went from 57 to 6,000. But then he only put up 16 fantasy points, and that was a game at home. Now he's going on the road to play Kansas City, gets a $500 price increase, might be without Marquise Goodwin again. I just don't see it. I understand he's going to have to throw a lot. I get that. But what has he shown this year while his number 1 receiver, most comfortable receiver, might be out again? Why does he get a $500 price increase? The production hasn't been there. I hate just pricing people up because of a matchup. I hate the Coors effect. I hate it. But at 6,500, I'll throw him in a lineup or 2, but I'm not too interested in him. Kareem Hunt at 6K, yes. I'm going to have a ton of Kareem Hunt. And that's about it. A dual threat in terms of rushing and receiving. Great matchup, at home, explosive offense. San Francisco's defense is not very good. So Kareem Hunt, 6K, load up on him, and I don't expect him to be too high owned. Last week he was only $200 more and was only, I think, 8% owned, 8 to 10% owned. So Kareem Hunt at 6K, the upside is just too great there. and he has a high touchdown upside because he sees goal line work, he sees passing down work. He's caught a touchdown from Pat Mahomes in the preseason and caught one last week, so I'm going to load up on Kareem Hunt. And on the flip side, Matt Breida, I'm going to load up on Breida too. Now, I'm not expecting anything close to last week where he put up 28 fantasy points. I'm expecting more towards the 20. I think he's a little more involved in the passing game this week and less involved in the run game. The more points that this game puts up, the better for Breida because Alfred Morris just does not catch passes. I personally think Matt Breida has passed him on the depth chart. San Fran's not going to run the ball too much most weeks anyway, especially in matchups like this and last week when they had Detroit. I don't expect Breida to bust off for 138 yards again, especially in 11 carries, but I do expect him to see a little bit more work. And as the passing down back as well, 5,400, that price might scare some people off. So I like Breida. Moving over to wide receiver, Tyreek Hill, 8,500, priced up there with the top wide receivers. He's more than Odell. He's more than DeAndre Hopkins. He gets a dream matchup. This is a prime letdown spot, and not because of Tyreek, but because San Fran tries so hard to game plan for Tyreek. Doesn't mean I'm not going to have him. I'm still going to have some exposure to Tyreek. I'm just not going to go crazy with him at that price point. That's just not that it's not too high or it's not deserved. It's perfect. I mean, the guy's put up 45 and 20 fantasy points, so I completely understand it. It's just a little too pricey for me. Marquise Goodwin was limited in practice on Thursday, so he may return this week. Probably has a decent shot of returning this week. If he does play, I do like him. Pierre Garçon's going to have a good week at some point. But at 5,300, there just isn't enough upside there for him. I don't like Pierre Garçon as a high-volume, two-touchdown type guy. He's not that anymore in his career, and a lot of injuries have slowed him. Up there in age, 5,300, with Marquise Goodwin possibly coming back. He's just, George Kittle's still there, Breida in the backfield. Just a little too much for me. Sammy Watkins, I liked Sammy Watkins a lot. If you listen to the DFS podcast from last week, Sammy Watkins is a name that I had brought up that I liked a lot. Now, I don't expect him to have a 31-yard rush to gain an extra 3 points, but even if you take that away, he had exactly 19 fantasy points, 6 catches on 7 targets for 100 yards. Has shown a decent chemistry with Mahomes so far. Had 5 targets week 1. Big time boomer bust player, and 4,100. I don't like that price tag for him. I'll probably have a little bit of exposure to him, but I'm not going to go crazy with him. I think a lot more people hop on him this week because of the price for Tyreek, and they want exposure to this offense without paying too much. So I could see Watkins' price being up there, but I could also see this being the week where he does pay off in terms of touchdowns because Tyreek is going to be game planned against. So I just love this Chiefs offense. I'm going to have exposure all over. I'm going to have some Tyreek. I'm going to have some Sammy Watkins. I'm going to have a lot of Mahomes and a lot of Hunt. Outside of that, I know Pettis started last week, but it all depends on Goodwin. Until we get word on him, if he's definitely playing or if he's definitely out, no Pettis for me. Travis Kelce at 6,700 had a huge week last week against Pittsburgh. I like Kelce this week again. I think this game is going to be the second highest scoring game on the slate with the highest scoring game next. So Kelce at 6,700, by all means, I think this game there's a lot of points scored in this game. So I'll have some Kelce. I'm not going to go too crazy because 6,700 is a decent amount. And I don't expect him to be up around 26 to 29 fantasy points again. Even though the matchup's great, I think he'll be more towards the 20 to 24 range is kind of his limit this week, as opposed to 33. George Kittle, $4,500 price tag, $700 price increase after 4 targets and a 4.2 fantasy point game against Detroit. I think a lot of people are going to be off him this week because of that. I'm probably going to be off him because of that. 4,500. Now we're getting up in the territory where if you miss, it's gonna hurt because you have Ebron, you have Doyle. You have Hooper at 2,900. I just don't see paying up 4,500 for George Kittle. I'd rather pay even $200 less and go for Evan Ingram. So these tight ends, I'll have a little bit of Kelsey. I might throw Kittle in one or two, but that's about it. You can't play either one of these defenses. You can't. And there's better options in the same price range, so there's just no need. We'll leave Kansas City and head to Los Angeles, where we have the battle for LA, the Chargers at the Rams. This is actually what I think is going to be the highest scoring game on the slate. This is the game of the week matchup that TNBS has selected for the game of the week preview. So it's going to be the Chargers at the Rams. Both of these quarterbacks are heavily in play. I understand the Rams have the number one defense so far, and they have a great defense, but they played Oakland and they played Arizona. So take it with a grain of salt. They haven't played an offense quite like the Chargers, and the Chargers to me are up there as one of the better offenses in the NFL. Phillip Rivers is Phillip Rivers. He's still damn good. In a game where I think most people expected them at Buffalo to be a blowout, which it was for a good portion of the game, he still put up 22 fantasy points and threw for 3 touchdowns. Week 1 obviously was the game against Kansas City where he threw for over 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. He put up 33 fantasy points in Week 1 and 22.7 in Week 2. So I love Phillip Rivers at 5,800. I think this game shoots out. I'm going to have heavy exposure to this game. Both of these quarterbacks are heavily in play for me. Flipping over to running back, Todd Gurley at 9,200. He gets the Alvin Kamara treatment and stays at the same price point. He is cheaper than Week 1 where he was 9,600. He put up 32 in Week 2. 3 rushing touchdowns. Wasn't very productive on the ground though, at 2.2 yards per carry average. Had 3 catches for 30 yards. Nothing crazy there, but they beat Arizona 34-0. So this week it's a much more difficult game. They're at home. I think Todd Gurley gets used a little bit more. Not so much. I don't expect him to have 3 rushing touchdowns. I think we could see him have 1 or 2 and a passing touchdown though. So Todd Gurley at 9,200. If it's between Gurley and Kamara, I think I'm leaning Gurley this week. Believe it or not. And I think most people are going to be on the Kamara side. Melvin Gordon at 7,400. Yes, please. Love Melvin Gordon here. Has put up the exact same 30.6 fantasy points in the first 2 weeks. Had 3 touchdowns last week at Buffalo. 2 in the pass, 1 rushing. Had 9 catches for over 100 yards in Week 1. He's heavily involved on the ground. Heavily involved in the pass game. He was hurt his neck, but he returned to practice in a full capacity. 7,400 is way too cheap for him. I think they need him severely in this matchup. So I'm going to be loading up on Melvin Gordon. 2 of my favorite running back plays on the week, Melvin Gordon and Kareem Hunt. I like a stack there. Maybe Phillip Rivers, Melvin Gordon, Kareem Hunt, and then pair him with Mike Williams or Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen has dropped all the way down to 7,300. A huge $500 price decrease. Love it. I'm gonna have so much exposure to this game. I'm gonna load up on Phillip Rivers, Jared Goff. Gonna have a ton of Melvin Gordon. I'm gonna have some Todd Gurley. I'm gonna have a lot of Keenan Allen. I'm gonna have a ton of Brandon Cooks. I had Cooks as a top 15 ranked fantasy wide receiver this year. He does have 3 straight 1,000-yard receiving seasons. Is looking to make that 4 straight here with LA. Had a huge week last week against Arizona. They couldn't contain him at all. 7 catches on 9 targets for 159 yards. I had said in my solo the podcast, I think it was episode 3, I had talked about Brandon Cooks, and I had said, if Robert Woods was truly the number 1 option, was their number 1 receiver, why did they feel the need to go out and get someone of Cooks' caliber? I understand because he's a deep. His deep ball ability and all that, but Cooks is so much. He's been unfairly labeled a deep ball threat because that's what most teams have tried to turn him into. but he's a great route runner, and he plays a lot bigger than his 5'11" frame is, or 5'10" frame is. He plays like he's 6'2", and he's not afraid to run somebody over. I absolutely love Cooks this week, especially at 7K. I think this game shoots out, and I think he's a big part of it. Robert Woods is going to break out one of these weeks. Could very well be this week. I think all three of the Rams wide receivers are in play. Woods at 5,100. There's a lot of value and a lot of upside there. Same thing with Cooper Kupp at 4,900. Kupp he had a touchdown in week 1 on 9 targets, had 6 catches for 63 yards on 6 targets in week 2, and a 34-0 blowout. Like I said, this game I expect to be closer. I expect the Rams to actually be passing more in this game. So, from every single, all the wide receivers in this game are playable to me. The only one that I question is Tyrell. Tyrell's the only one that I'm not interested in. But Mike Williams, I love Mike Williams. I played him week 1 when nobody played him, and he had the 13-point game. Week 1, obviously, there was so much value that it didn't pan out. But at 3,900, 2 double-digit fantasy point games to start the year, has a touchdown. Last week wasn't very needed against Buffalo. This week he is going to be needed. He's the number 3 option in a pass-heavy offense with Phillip Rivers as his quarterback. And Phillip Rivers trusts him already. So that's a big step. He was the number 1 or the number 6 overall pick 2 years ago or last year. Just sat out the season with a broken back. So he is talented and he has a ton of potential. Mike Williams has been flying under the radar all year in season-long, in Draftkings. And as the year goes on, I expect him to pick up more and more value as the prices kind of adjust and set themselves. So all the receivers in this game are playable to me. Tight end, no tight ends are playable to me. I'm not interested in any of the tight ends. And as far as the defenses, I expect this game to shoot out, so I'm not interested in either one of these defenses. All the offense for me in this game. Especially with Pat Mahomes garnering so much ownership, I think Phillip Rivers is going to, and Jared Goff is going to go a bit under the cracks this week in a game where I think turns out to be the highest scoring game on the slate. And I think people are going to be afraid of that Chargers offense because of the Chargers defense, especially when they see that first under opponent rank next to them. I think that's going to turn a lot of people off to them. We'll leave LA and head to Seattle, where we have Russell Wilson at 6K. Russell Wilson and the Seahawks have absolutely been killing me with their stupid-ass garbage time fucking touchdowns, like last week to Will Dissly. I did a Draftkings showdown. That touchdown to Will Dissly knocked me out of the money, all my teams out of the money. I was fucking furious. Right at almost just about as time expired, too. Like, fucking Will Dissly. But the Seahawks do get to go home for this game. Still no Doug Baldwin. Run game isn't there. Russell Wilson's running for his life. The offensive line sucks. Dallas has a really strong defensive line. Sacked Eli, and Eli was under constant pressure last Sunday night. So I don't like Russell Wilson. I like this game to be low scoring. I think it's going to be a bit of a defensive battle. You want to take a stab with Dak. I don't think anybody's going to own him, and he does have a low price point. Seattle did just give up something like 20 fantasy points to Mitch Trubisky the week before, or 18 to 20 fantasy points to Mitch Trubisky. So Dak could definitely, for 5,100 and very low ownership, Dak could definitely provide some serious value this week, especially if you're trying to be a bit contrarian. But flipping over to running back, obviously Zeke is in play, under 8K, put up 19.7 last week, has a rushing touchdown the first 2 weeks. Defenses are stacking the box. He's still averaging over 4.5 yards a carry. Has 3 and 5 catches in the first 2 games, 17 and 19 fantasy points. I think a lot of people are going to stay away from him because the production hasn't been there yet this year. So Zeke at 77 is in play. I can't play any of these Seattle running backs. I know Carson starts, but Carson starts and saw 6 carries last week. Not interested in that. And Rashad Penny, who put up 10 rushes last week, I'm not interested in that either. This backfield is just untouchable to me right now. Just not interested in it. Wide receiver, Tyler Lockett caught a touchdown, 4,300, has some big play upside, does return punts and kicks too, which could be another 6 points. Is a deep ball guy, so if he catches 2, he's going to get the 100, be right around that 100-yard bonus. So at 5,300, I don't mind him, but I like Brandon Marshall a lot, especially at 4,500. Last week didn't see the work or as much work as Lockett did. Week 1 caught a touchdown. He's not going to go to, he's not a burner down the field. He's a possession receiver, a chain mover, and a red zone threat, a big body that can move the chains. So taking him for what he is, there isn't, I can't say there's a ton of upside there because there really isn't. But, if we can get, say, 6 catches for 70 yards and a touchdown, 13, 19 fantasy points for 4,500. Not the best, but not the worst either, especially considering his ownership might be almost non-existent. And as for the Cowboys, Cole Beasley didn't do much last week, but the week before that had 8 targets, did have 7 catches for 70 yards. Is Dak's favorite target and Dak's most comfortable target. So I don't mind a stab there. I do expect some people to hop on the Tavon Austin train despite 1 touch in week 1. I'm not interested in Tavon until they start using him more. I'm not. This Cowboys wide receivers, they're too hard to figure out. There's so many mediocre players there, and they're fine with just rotating these mediocre guys that it's kind of hard to pinpoint which one's going to do what. Will Dissly at 3,300. He's got a touchdown both weeks. Week 1 had over 100 yards. But last week's touchdown came essentially in garbage time. He has shown the knack for a big play. His touchdown went for 34 yards, and he had 2 catches other than that. So 2 catches for 8 yards prior to that. I can't do it. I'm not interested in them. 3,300. It's not killer, but I'm just not at that not even so much the price point. It's just the player. It's the lack of volume. I might throw him in 1 or 2 though, just because Doug Baldwin's going to be out and Seattle's lacking weapons, and for whatever reason refuses to play CJ Procise more in the pass game. So, I mean, I just think Will Dissly's ownership might be a little too high this week for his production, and the fact that he's seen 4 targets a game the first 2 weeks and 3 catches the first 2 weeks. That's just not, there's not enough upside there for me. The Cowboys defense I love this week at 2,200 is insane. They're coming off of a week where they absolutely destroyed Eli Manning and that Giants offensive line. They had 6 sacks, 3 sacks in week 1. They're averaging 14.5 points, or excuse me, 15 points, 14.5 points per game they're giving up. So they've given up 16 in week 1 at Carolina and 13 last week against against the Giants with 9 sacks in 2 games. That Seahawks offensive line is terrible. No Doug Baldwin. They're in a bit of shambles right now. So the Cowboys at 2,200, I really like them. The cheap defenses this week is the way to go, I think. There's just too many of them. I don't see paying up 4,300 for Minnesota, even though they're playing Buffalo. And I don't see paying up $4K for Jacksonville, even though they're playing Tennessee. They're nice matchups. They're good matchups, but I don't think the highest scoring defense is going to be those 2. I would take the field. You give me the field over Jacksonville's defense and Minnesota's defense, and I take the field all day. Last game on the slate, Chicago at Arizona. Oh, God, Arizona. Sam Bradford, I don't know what the fuck is going on with you. Didn't break 100 yards passing last week. Blaine Gabbert threw for 117 and Sam Bradford threw for 90. Holy shit. Bradford's off limits. Can't play him. Won't play him. Surprised Josh Rosen hasn't been tabbed the starter, honestly. But I think we see Bradford struggles. I think we see Josh Rosen sooner than later in that game. I can't play him, though, just because there's no guarantee. And Bradford playing with his job on the line might step up a bit. On the flip side there, Mitch Trubisky threw 2 touchdowns last week, also had 2 interceptions. One was tipped, not really his fault. Had the rushing touchdown in week 1. Has 3 turnovers on the year to 3 total touchdowns, 2 passing. Arizona's defense isn't great, but I could see this being a get-right spot for Arizona. Now, not their offense. I don't think they're going to go out and put up 30 points or anything like that, but I could see this as a get-right spot in terms of get competitive. They do so. I'm not gonna at 5,500. There's better options. I'd rather go with Dak at 51 than Mitch at 55. I don't hate Mitch. I'll probably throw him in 1 or 2, but just to be contrarian. But I'm not. He just doesn't have the upside. He doesn't have the 300 yards passing upside. He doesn't have the 50 yards and a touchdown rushing upside to go with the guaranteed at least 2 touchdowns passing. So Trubisky's a tough one. I'm likely to avoid. David Johnson at 7,200. I played David Johnson the first 2 weeks just because I knew the ownership was going to be low. Last week it really screwed me. At least in Washington, week 1 against Washington, he scored a touchdown and had 5 catches for 30 yards. So he at least put up something. He is all the way down to 7,200. The way that he was used last week was criminal. Any week that he only has 14 touches is disgusting, and he only had something like 8 carries up until the 4th quarter, which is unacceptable. Arizona can't play like that and play him that little and expect to be competitive. So I will have some exposure to him again because of that price, the involvement in the pass and the rush game, and the fact that they really have no weapons. And sooner than later, they're going to have to realize David Johnson is our weapon. So I want to be on the train when that happens, and at 7,200, we're not likely to see him that cheap again, especially once he gets going. Jordan Howard at 65. He just hasn't shown me enough to warrant a $6,500 price tag. He's coming off of a 10-point game. I understand Draftkings couldn't adjust the price because he was on the Monday night game last week, so I have no problem with that, but he's just too expensive for me. I do like his pass game involvement. 5 targets in week or 5 catches in week 1, and then 3 targets last week. So I do like. I like his involvement there, but I don't like his price. I'm likely to avoid. Tyreek Cohen likely to avoid. Moving over to wide receiver, Larry Fitzgerald. I think he practiced today. It was limited, but he practiced. The only thing that worries me about him is that it is a hamstring issue. Week 1, though, against Washington at home, he had 10 targets, 7 for 76. He's 5,400. We don't see Larry Fitzgerald this cheap. And with this offense priced down as much as they are, I'm going to have decent exposure to Larry Fitzgerald. Same thing with Allen Robinson at 5,400. Even though he's going to have likely to have Patrick Peterson on him, Allen Robinson's not a burner. He doesn't rely on speed. He's 6'3", 6'4". He's a big body receiver with good athleticism. So he's more likely to go up and get the ball than he is, fly past you and catch it. So he had 14 targets last week, 7 in week 1. He's shown pretty good chemistry with Trubisky already. We saw how productive Allen Robinson can be in Jacksonville. He looks to be fully over that torn ACL. At 5,400, I like him a lot too. I just think that these prices are way too low for Larry Fitzgerald and Allen Robinson, despite the situations that they're in. Taylor Gabriel's seen a decent amount of work. He just hasn't found space yet to break anything. 3,800, you want to take a stab? I mean, that's about all he is a GPP dart. I couldn't see loading up on him. That doesn't make sense to me. But if you want to throw him in 1 or 2 lineups to try to be a bit contrarian, by all means. Christian Kirk, didn't practice on Thursday, and he was in a car accident. I'm not sure exactly what that means. Monitor his availability tomorrow if he returns to practice on Friday. At 3,500, this Arizona's offense is not this bad. Something's got to give, and I could see them being part of a winning lineup in the next few weeks. So Christian Kirk, they did increase his targets like they said they wanted to. He got 5 and 4 catches for 27 yards. And something's got to give. Either they're going to go to Rosen and it's going to open up the offense, or they're just going to say fuck it with Bradford and open up the offense and start throwing the ball down the field. Flipping over to tight end, Trey Burton at 3,900, caught his first touchdown as a Bear last week. Good athlete. Has seen some targets the first 2 weeks. Hasn't shown too much chemistry with Trubisky, especially week 1, where he had 6 targets, 1 catch for 15 yards. Did catch a touchdown in week 2. At 3,900, I don't mind him. Again, there's better plays. I don't mind him, though. One of those better plays, in my opinion, this week at 2,800 is Ricky Seals-Jones. I know he hasn't topped 20 receiving yards yet, but he has 6 targets in both games. And like I said, something's bound to give with this Arizona offense. They're too talented to play this bad, and a lot of it's revolved around Sam Bradford. He's thrown for 220 yards in 2 combined games total, so something's got to give there. But Ricky Seals-Jones at that price point, why not? Worth a stab. Jermaine Gresham is back. Might take some snaps away from Seals-Jones, but there's no doubt Seals-Jones is definitely the more talented of the two. Bears defense at 3,500. If I was to pay up for a defense, this would be the defense I would pay up for. 3,500 isn't too bad. We've seen how bad Arizona has played this year and has been this year. But this could be a get-right spot for Arizona. And like I said, what I mean by get-right is get competitive. But still, at 3,500, that's too intriguing with how bad Arizona has been. So, Bears defense might be the one defense that I pay up for this week. But, yeah, that about wraps it up for each game. I want to wish everybody the best of luck this week. If I don't win, hopefully one of you guys do. We'll be back next week with the podcast, episode 5, which is my solo podcast. Will be out on It'll be out on Wednesday. This Saturday, me and Nikki B are doing a rewatch of Canelo and Triple G 2. So we're gonna watch it live and kind of react and see what we see, because I thought Triple G won, he thought Canelo won. I want to see what he's seeing. He wants to see what I'm seeing. We're not trying to change each other's mind. We just want to kind of, point out where in the fight we think this person took over, or where this person got points, or, why this person won. We want to do it more so than just saying, oh, well, they did this, they did this, they did this. I want to, we want to be able to sit down and say, okay, it was because of this, and give an exact example. So Saturday, that'll be before the Joshua Povetkin fight. We're going to do that. Friday is the Friday Night Pick'em podcast. That'll be done. That'll be out by Saturday morning. And then, like I said, my solo podcast will be out next week with the first installment of Coach's Corner, where I interview high school basketball coaches. Week 1 is going to be Aaron Rose, high school basketball coach at Coney Island Prep in Brooklyn, New York. Be sure to check that out. Be sure to check out all the other great podcasts we have. Centering with Nick, like I said, episode 2 is going to be out on Saturday. It's going to be a rewatch of Canelo and Triple G, the second fight. If you want to argue with me, tell me I suck, tell me I'm great, whatever. You can find me on Twitter, at Millsy021. You can find the Nosebleed section on Twitter, at TNBS021. And, if you guys, if there's anything you want to see incorporated more, like, you want me to talk cash games, You don't like one person on, you don't like two people on, you only listen to a certain length or however long a video is. By all means, get at me on Twitter. I've been your host, Tommy, aka Millsy, and best of luck this week to everybody who's playing Draftkings. And real quick before I leave, NBA late swap is back on Draftkings, baby. NBA late swap is back. Let's go. And on that note,